town of Cold Harbor, Alberta held its charity resettlement auction on the last Friday of every September. It was not called a charity resettlement auction. It was called a community placement drive, which was the kind of language that made a hard thing sound like a church potluck. Children who had come through the provincial welfare office, from failed homesteads, from fathers who had drunk themselves into the ground, from situations the government had quietly determined required a firm hand and a new address, were presented to the assembled families of the surrounding townships, who could take them in as wards or working members of the household in exchange for a modest administrative fee that covered the province's paperwork and very little else. Most of the children were claimed before noon. The small ones first, the round-faced, gap-toothed ones that women with quiet houses reached for without thinking. Then the older boys, taken by farmers who needed hands and whose only question was whether the boy could be up before dawn and follow direction without argument. It was 1923 and October, and the Alberta sky was doing what it does in October, pressing down, gray and serious, like it had made a decision about the year and was not interested in discussion. Lena Drummond was standing at the far edge of the crowd, with no particular intention of being there. She was 27 years old, a schoolteacher without a permanent post, with a rented room above the hardware store, and the particular economy of a woman who has learned to want less because wanting more had not, in her experience, proven reliable. She was in Cold Harbor for the weekend, covering a sick colleague's class on a short-term arrangement that had already run 3 weeks longer than anyone intended. She had walked past the community placement drive on her way to the post office. She had stopped because of the boy. He was standing at the end of the line, the last one, which told its own story. He was perhaps 10 years old, though something about the way he held himself, shoulders back, chin level, eyes moving steadily across the crowd, made him seem older than that, small for his age, with dark, reddish hair that someone had recently and imprecisely cut, and a wool coat that was a size and a half too large, the sleeves turned back at the wrists with a practicality that suggested he had done it himself. His boots were good boots, better than the coat, and he was wearing them with the awareness of someone who understood they were his best thing and intended to keep them that way. He was watching the crowd the way Lena watched unfamiliar classrooms on the first day, noting who was paying attention and who was not, calculating distance and tone, deciding, before anyone spoke to him, what kind of situation this was. She had watched 3 families approach him and turn away, not unkindly. Cold Harbor had the manners of a prairie town, which meant people were careful with how they showed you they didn't want you, but with the particular deflection of people who had come for something specific, and this was not it. Too small for heavy farm work, too composed to seem in need of mothering. Not the child they had pictured when they drove in from the county road. The boy watched each family leave without changing his expression, which was, somehow, worse than if he had looked disappointed. Lena was still standing there when the welfare officer, a broad-shouldered woman named Dix with a clipboard and the manner of someone who had been doing difficult work for a long time and had made peace with most of it, came to the end of the line and looked at the boy and looked at her clipboard and looked at Lena. "You interested?" she said, not hopefully, more the way a person reads the last line on a list. Lena looked at the boy. The boy looked at Lena. "What's his name?" Lena said. "Thomas," said Dix. "Thomas Calloway. Wait, pardon me." She flipped the page. "Thomas Crew. Father deceased 8 months ago, mining accident outside Drumheller. Mother left the family before that. No other relatives located in the province." "How old?" 10, just turned. Lena looked at her own hands, then at Thomas Crew, who was looking back at her with those measuring eyes and who had not, in the entirety of her observation, shown fear or appeal, only the steady assessment of someone running a calculation. "What does it cost?" she said. $3, said Dix. "Administrative." Lena reached into her coat pocket. She was not entirely certain, in the moment of reaching, what she was doing or why. She had a rented room with a single bed and a window that let in the cold. She had a teaching position that might not exist past December. She was 27 years old and had no experience with children outside a classroom, and no particular qualifications for the responsibility she was, apparently, in the process of acquiring. Thomas Crew stood beside her while Dix completed the paperwork, and when it was done, he picked up the small canvas bag at his feet, very small, which told her everything about what he owned, and looked at her with an expression that was not grateful and was not frightened and was not anything she had a ready word for. "Where do you live?" he said. His voice was level. "The question of someone who intends to know the facts. Lena Drummond," she said, which was not an answer to his question, but it felt like the right place to start. "Thomas," he said. "I know," she said. "I live in Cold Harbor right now, above the hardware store." She paused. "It's temporary." "How temporary?" he said. "I'm not sure," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. The nod of someone who has evaluated the options and found this one the least unreasonable. "All right," he said. They walked to the boarding house where Lena had arranged for a second room. She had done this before she fully understood she was going to do it. Somewhere between handing over the $3 and watching Dix initial the form, and Thomas carried his own bag without being asked and did not speak until they reached the door. "Is there supper?" he said. "There will be," she said. "There will." Mrs. Value, who ran the boarding house and who had the particular gift of noticing when a situation required food rather than questions, set 2 plates without commentary and left them to it. Thomas ate the way someone eats when they are genuinely hungry but have decided not to show it. He was methodical. He finished everything on the plate. "My father taught me not to waste," he said, when he noticed her noticing. "He sounds like he was a practical man," Lena said. "He was," Thomas said. "Not lucky, but practical." They rode out the following week on the afternoon coach to Lacombe, where Lena had been offered a longer-term position at the county school. She had written to the superintendent the morning after the placement drive and received a reply by return post that was cautiously encouraging, which in Lena's experience meant yes, if nothing went wrong. She had explained Thomas's situation plainly and asked whether the arrangement presented a problem. The superintendent, a man named Greaves who had been running rural Alberta schools for 20 years, wrote back that it did not and that he would arrange a room in the schoolhouse annex large enough for 2. They sat across from each other on the coach. Thomas had a book, a battered atlas, with half the spine missing, that he read with the focus of someone who finds maps more reliable than most things. "What do you know about Lacombe?" he said, without looking up. "It's smaller than Cold Harbor," she said. "Good farmland. The school has 40 students across 3 grades. Do you like teaching?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "I like the moment when something clicks for someone," she said. "The rest of it I manage." He looked up from the atlas. "My father said that about mining," he said. "He liked the part when you hit what you were looking for. The rest was just work." "What was he looking for?" Lena said. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Mostly coal," he said. Sometimes he said he didn't know. He'd just say there was always something further in. He went back to his atlas. Lena looked out the window at the prairie going gray and flat in the October light and thought that this was either the most sensible thing she had ever done or the least, and that the difference between those 2 things was probably going to be determined by factors she could not yet see. She had grown up in Manitoba, the second of 4 children of a minister father and a mother who had died when Lena was 9 years old. Fever in the middle of February, quick and final. She had learned early that things you depended on could leave without explanation, and had organized her life accordingly. She did not own many things. She did not promise what she was not certain she could deliver. She had been engaged, once, briefly, to a man named Arthur, who had decided that a woman with a teaching certificate and no intention of giving it up was not what he had been looking for. That had been 4 years ago. She had not found this as devastating as she supposed she should. She had not said any of this to Thomas. She was not sure why she said the next part. "I don't have family here either," she said. "In Alberta, I mean. My father is in Winnipeg. My sisters are in Ontario." Thomas looked up. "Why are you in Alberta?" "A position opened," she said. "I took it." He considered this. "Do you like it here?" "I'm getting used to it," she said. He nodded, as if that were a satisfying answer. My father said Alberta was hard on people at first, he said. He said it got easier when you stopped waiting for it to look like somewhere else. Lena looked at him. How old did you say you were? 10, he said. 11 in March. Your father sounds like he was a wise man, she said. He read a lot, Thomas said. He said if you can't go somewhere, you can read your way there. He smoothed the page of the atlas. That's why he gave me this. Lacombe was smaller than Cold Harbor and quieter and had the particular quality of a town that has been there long enough to be comfortable in itself. The school was a two-room building at the edge of the main street, and the annex room was plain and cold in the mornings, but had 2 windows and enough space for 2 narrow beds and a table, which Thomas immediately claimed as a desk. Superintendent Greaves was a compact, careful man who looked at Thomas once and asked him a single question. Can you read? Yes, Thomas said. Above your grade? Probably, Thomas said without apology. Greaves looked at Lena. Lena looked at Thomas, who was looking back at Greaves with those steady eyes. He can sit in on the older class, Greaves said. We'll see. Thomas sat in on the older class and within a week had become the kind of student who asks questions that make the teacher check their own notes afterward. Lena discovered this from Greaves with the tone of a man who is pleased about something but doesn't want to oversell it. That boy of yours, Greaves said one afternoon. He corrected my arithmetic today. Was he right? Lena said. Unfortunately, said Greaves. Lena found Thomas in the annex room that evening, working through a geography problem in an exercise book, with the focused intensity he gave everything. She sat across from him at the table. I heard you corrected Mr. Greaves today, she said. He made an error, Thomas said. You could have mentioned it privately, she said. He was writing it on the board, Thomas said. The other children were copying it down wrong. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the expression he had when he was determining whether something required further explanation. I wasn't trying to embarrass him, Thomas said. I just didn't want everyone to learn it wrong. I know, Lena said. Are you angry? No, she said honestly. I'm trying to figure out how to tell you to be more careful without telling you to be more careful, without telling you to be wrong. Thomas thought about this. That's a hard thing to say, he said. It is, she said. He went back to his exercise book. After a moment he said, without looking up, Mr. Greaves didn't seem angry. He just looked at me for a long time. That's how he looks when he's deciding what to think about something, she said. Like you, Thomas said. Lena said nothing to that. There was a girl in town, 12 years old, the daughter of the grain merchant on the main street. She had found Thomas during his first week in Lacombe and appointed herself his informant on the town's customs and personalities, a role she performed with the comprehensive authority of someone who considers this a public service. Her name was Iris Fallow, and she was the kind of person who made friends by deciding you were one, which Thomas seemed to find more reasonable than unexpected. The trouble came from Iris's older brother, who was 15 and had the particular confidence of a boy who has grown up in a small town where his family's name counts for something. He had watched Thomas walk to school with Iris 3 mornings in a row and had made the kind of comments, specifically about Thomas's coat and Thomas's bag and Thomas's general situation, that were designed to be heard. Thomas had said nothing. He had walked to school and arrived on time and opened his books. Lena found out from Iris, who told it with the righteous indignation of an 11-year-old who has a clearer sense of justice than most adults ever manage to sustain. She went to find Thomas. He was in the annex room, working through a problem in his exercise book, which was what he was usually doing when she came to find him. She sat on the edge of the other bed. I heard about what happened on the way to school, she said. It's fine, Thomas said, not dismissively, just accurately. It's not nothing, she said. I know, he said. He set down his pencil. But I've heard things like that before. People have been saying things about where I come from since my father died. He said it without self-pity, which was one of his consistent qualities. He narrated difficult things, factually, without embellishment, which was either something he was born with or something his circumstances had built into him, and which Lena found, the more time she spent with him, one of the most clarifying qualities a person could have. Does it bother you? She said. He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he did anything. It used to, he said. Now I mostly think those people don't know anything about me. What they say is about what they can see. What they can see is the coat. Lena looked at him. That's a hard thing to know, she said. At 10 years old. 11 in March, he said. 11 in March, he said. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The particular, not quite smile that she had begun to recognize as the version that was actually genuine. Did you go and say something to him? Thomas said. I'm considering it, she said. Don't, he said. It'll make it a thing. Right now it's nothing. Leave it nothing. Leave it nothing. She looked at him. All right, she said. She left it nothing. But she paid a visit the next afternoon to the grain merchant on the main street, not to threaten and not to lecture, and she had a conversation about standards of conduct in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, and she said it once, quietly, and the grain merchant understood it completely because he was a man who had built a reputation and did not want it complicated by a 15-year-old's poor judgment. Thomas never knew about this. If he suspected, he said nothing. The school year ended in June. Greaves offered Lena a permanent position for the following September, full salary, with the annex room included on a formal basis. He said it looking at his desk rather than at her, in the manner of a man who considers the matter practically obvious but understands that other people may need to be told things plainly. Lena said she would think about it. This was honest, because there was something she had been thinking about that was separate from the question of the school position, and that required thought. She had, by this point, spent 8 months in a single room with Thomas Crew. She had watched him read his way through every book in the school library and send away for more with the modest allowance she had begun giving him without either of them formally acknowledging it as a regular arrangement. She had watched him teach himself the rudiments of French from a grammar book left behind by a previous teacher, and then correct her own French when she attempted it, gently but accurately. She had watched him grow half an inch in the spring and outgrow his boots and approach this as an interesting logistical problem rather than a complaint. She had also watched him, in the evenings, hold the battered atlas open on the table and trace routes with his finger that went to places far from Alberta, not wistfully, just the way you hold a map when you intend, eventually, to go somewhere. She thought about her father in Winnipeg, who she had seen twice in 4 years. She thought about her mother, dead when she was 9, and the particular shape that absence made when you had been carrying it long enough. One evening in late June, the school year finished, the annex room quiet, Thomas at the table with the atlas. She set down her marking and looked at him. Thomas, she said. He looked up. I need to tell you something, she said, and I want to say it plainly. All right, he said. He closed the atlas. When something required attention, he gave it full attention. I don't have a permanent home to offer you, she said. I have a teaching position that seems likely to continue, and a room that goes with it, and a reputation in this county that means something if I maintain it. That's what I have. He was quiet, listening. I've been thinking, she said, that if Greaves is offering me a permanent position, I might stay. And if I'm staying, I'd like, if you were willing, for this to be something more fixed than it's been. Properly fixed. Legally. He looked at her. What does that mean? He said. It means guardianship, she said. Formal adoption. If the province allows it for a single woman, which I am told it does in certain circumstances. She held his eyes. I'm 27 years old, and I teach school, and I've been moving from one temporary arrangement to the next for 6 years because it was easier than deciding to stay anywhere. I don't think I want to do that anymore. She paused. And I don't think you should have to either. Thomas was still for a moment. Why? He said. Not challenging. He wanted the honest answer. He always wanted the honest answer. She thought about it. She owed him the real one. Because you are the most precise thinker I have spent time with in 10 years of teaching children, she said. And because I stopped outside that placement drive for a reason I didn't understand at the time, and I think I do now. And because, she paused, because I'd like to have somewhere to come home to. not a rented room, somewhere, and I think you'd like that too. Thomas looked at the table for a long moment, the atlas, the exercise book with the French grammar, the window with the June light coming in flat and golden from the west. Then he looked up. Yes, he said, I'd want that. He said it simply, without ceremony, which was the only way he said things that mattered. Superintendent Greaves, when informed, said nothing for a long moment and then said, good, and wrote a letter to the provincial office that Lena later learned had been more forceful in its advocacy than his manner had suggested. The provincial office processed the guardianship papers with the efficient pragmatism of a government office that has, in the years since the war, become accustomed to unconventional arrangements. A solicitor in Red Deer filed the formal adoption documents in September of the following year. Iris Fallow made a cake, which she presented to Thomas with the gravity of someone performing an official function. Thomas accepted it with equal gravity and then ate 3 pieces, which he considered a reasonable response. Thomas grew 3 inches in the following year. He read every book Lena could source for him through the county library system and began writing letters to the Provincial Geological Survey, which had advertised for student assistance, requesting information about their requirements and whether correspondence study would qualify. The Geological Survey wrote back. Lena read the letter twice before giving it to him and said nothing about the particular feeling she had when she read the word promising. He was not, it turned out, too small for the world he was building. He was exactly the right size for it. At 14, he told Lena that he intended to study geology at university. I know, she said. You're not surprised, he said. You had that atlas since you were 10, she said. I've seen where your finger goes. He almost smiled. Actually smiled. The quick, real one that changed his whole face into something younger and less defended. At 16, he sat the provincial examination and received a result that caused Greaves, in an uncharacteristic display, to post it on the school door. At 18, he left for Edmonton on a Tuesday morning in September with a proper trunk, a new coat, and the atlas, which he had repaired with bookbinding tape and which was now missing 3 more pages than when his father had given it to him. Lena taught in Lacombe for another 11 years after that. She was not a person given to declarations. She had said what needed to be said on that June evening in the annex room and had not found it necessary to revisit it. But she was there when Thomas came home for Christmas and for summers, and for the occasional weekend when Edmonton and his studies had pressed down on him, the way Alberta's sky presses down in winter, and he always took the chair nearest the window in the school kitchen, which was the warmest one, and she always made tea without being asked. And those were small things, but small things accumulated are what most of life is made of. On the evening of Thomas's 25th birthday, a spring evening, Alberta finally deciding to be warm about it, he came to find her in the schoolyard, where she was marking papers on a bench she had placed there 2 summers ago specifically for the purpose. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask, she said. Are you glad, he said, that you stopped? She looked at him. 25 years old, precise and quiet and taller than his coat from the placement drive by a considerable margin, with the same steady, measuring eyes that had been taking stock of her since the first moment in Cold Harbor. Every day, she said. Every single day. He nodded, the nod of someone receiving information that confirms what they already knew. Then he sat down on the bench beside her and picked up the top paper from her pile and began to read it in the manner of someone who finds that sitting in useful proximity is a reasonable way to spend an evening. Lena led him. She went back to her marking. The Alberta spring came in over the fields in the schoolyard, late and stubborn and worth waiting for. And she sat in it and thought about $3, the last $3 in her coat pocket on an October Friday in a town called Cold Harbor, at the end of a line in a wool coat with the sleeves turned back. What they had bought her. Not a ward, not a project. A family, the one she had stopped expecting to find, discovered for $3 on a gray afternoon at the end of a line, carrying an atlas that held everything his father had ever given him. The best $3 she had ever spent.